Morning. It is Friday, November 15th, and hopefully going to finish up cover crop today. I did a fair amount yesterday, but didn't have the camera with me. Got about probably, I don't know, 90 or 100 acres on, so should be able to finish up what I have cost share on here today, hopefully, and then hope to do a little bit extra beyond what I have the cost share for, mostly in some spots that are kind of concentrated flow or steep slopes that are subject to erosion. It's a little bit frosty this morning, but not too bad, so I'm hoping that we'll be able to go halfway early. It only got down to like 25 or 20 something at least last night, so there's not a lot of frost, but I think the stalks will work better if they're a little bit thawed out or well thawed out and dry, hopefully. I noticed when I quit yesterday it was starting to frost up, and when I got home the closing wheels on the drill had a bunch of buildup on them. Not enough that it would really affect anything operation wise, but would like to have it halfway clean when we put it away for the year, so I'm hoping to finish up in good conditions, hopefully. Before we do that though, I'm going to do some more shoveling on the top of this bin, try to get that leveled out a little bit better. The forecast for next week is pretty good, so we're going to try to run the fans and hopefully get things drying down a little bit before we freeze it. And also have a tile contractor that's working on some conservation work, so probably we'll go over and see if they get going. They were planning on going yesterday and then had some mechanical problems, and I'm not exactly sure if they found something else wrong mechanically or electrically, but gonna go check on them and see how that's going, and maybe put a few things away from harvest as well. And then I'm going to be out of town for a couple days, so hopefully kind of get things in a spot that Dad can keep an eye on, stuff that needs to have an eye kept on it, and then get back on it when I get home Tuesday morning. And as I was walking out here to open up the shed, I noticed that having an issue that I've had a couple other times with this drill, where the wings come down, and I don't think that the hydraulics on the tractor are leaking because they've been pretty solid on everything else. I suspect that it's leaking past the piston inside the cylinder most likely, but the problem really is that instead of tipping the wings over center when you fold up, it hits, like the hinge piece here hits on the row unit, and it won't go all the way down, or it doesn't seem to like to go all the way down. Maybe there's enough slop in here that's why, because I see there's a little bit of a gap, and it looks like it has hit there at some point. But fortunately, I have the forklift there to stop it, and there's not even very much tension on that closing wheel, so probably not a big deal, but definitely annoying, and have to keep an eye on it if it sits for very long. This is what I was talking about with the buildup on the wheels. Basically just have, I don't know if the camera behind if you can see or not, but just kind of some dirt built up, mostly because there was some ice and moisture involved as well. So hopefully I want to try to get that cleaned off before we park it for the year. Mostly I just came out to get the shed opened up so that the sun could shine in here and get things warmed up a little bit, or get some air circulating. I don't think it got cold enough that the tractor starting is going to be an issue, but need to refill the seed cart with the rest of the rye so that we have it on, because the last time I filled I couldn't get quite all of it on there, and then kind of have a little better idea exactly how I'm going to come out quantity wise. Since I'm new to this drill setup, I sort of made my best guess as far as rate, but we may have to tweak that a little bit, especially for the extra stuff. I mean, I should have plenty to do what I need to for the cost share, but got a little bit extra to hopefully hit a few other spots. Not anything big, just probably 10 or 15 acres total for the other stuff. So, but otherwise the drill seems to be working relatively well. I've had a few issues with the little air injector cup things here. When I switched fields yesterday, I think I must have knocked some crap off the tires that landed in there. Had a couple of them plugged just from getting chunks of stalk or corn cob down in where the air sucks through. And I've had a little bit of trouble. Well, it looks like I have a hose off there. I wonder how long I ran with it like that last night. With some of the hoses coming loose, I'm not sure exactly like if the hoses are original or if they're kind of undersized. I noticed that some of them have some electrical tape around the ends, which I suspect somebody added to get them to pinch down better, so I may have to start doing that on the ones that I'm having issues with. But it has a blockage sensor system, but the blockage sensors don't seem to really work right or in their entirety. I think some of them are working some of the time, but some of them are not working any of the time, and some of them seem kind of intermittent. So mostly I've just been trying to get out and check to make sure that I still have airflow out the rows every once in a while. Since this isn't for cash crop, it's not super critical that we're always planting all of the rows. I mean, it would be better, obviously, if we have a consistent stand clear across the width, but for the sake of sucking up nutrients and erosion control, having one row missing every now and then isn't going to be the end of the world, because we're just going to kill this in the spring before we plant soybeans anyway. But definitely have a few things that need a little bit of attention before we run this next year, or would like to, get it working a little bit better in a few ways. I've replaced a few bearings. We did a couple bearings on the opener discs yesterday. One of those is on the wing, so I should check, because it was kind of, the bearings were loose in the, it feels good. I don't remember if it was both of those seem tight, although that one has a bunch of crap jammed behind it, so it's hard to tell. But I think some of the bearings on the closing wheels are a little bit loose. They're kind of known to be a problem area on this particular machine, just because of the way that when you park it, the bearing is sort of like sitting downhill from the shaft, so it's easy for water to get in there and cause problems inside, or get past the seal and muck up the bearing or the balls inside the bearing. So there's a few of those that I need to work on, but they're not a huge pain, but they're not the easiest thing, because they have a roll pin that attaches them to this, so you have to knock the roll pin out, and then the shaft on the bearing is usually seized in that bracket. And then you take these bolts out to get the bearing's actually down inside there. So if they weren't too bad, for the time being I just left them, because I wasn't sure how this whole operation was going to work, and I was trying to get it in the field. But there are a few things that could use a little bit of adjustment and tweaking. Otherwise, the opening system seems good. If I was to use this for soybeans, I think I would definitely want some weight on the wings, because I don't think I'm getting quite as much penetration on those outer row units. But for rye, I think it's probably fine. Rye will grow just about on concrete if it has the opportunity. So as long as we can kind of get some seed thrown on the ground, that's the main idea, or ideally some seed thrown on the ground and some dirt thrown over it. But that's basically where we're at. I'm going to go shovel on the bin some, maybe run a couple other errands, and then maybe see if I can get in the field here in an hour or two. If there was any question whether the dirt was sticking because of the frost, I would say that would prove it, because we have some nice little closing wheel shaped discs laying on the ground underneath the drill here. It's going to end up being after lunch before I get to the field, because I got tied up screwing around with some other stuff this morning. Got my half an hour of cardio that I didn't really want, shoveling out the bin. Have a little bit farther to go probably on that, but as much as I love grain spreaders, I kind of like to divide it up so that I don't get too frustrated and sweaty at any one time. So just kind of keep shoveling a little bit. It's a 42-foot bin, and basically the high spot is a long ways from the low spot right now, so it takes quite a bit of effort to make much progress, but it is what it is. Other than that, right now I'm going to get some seed put into the seed tender cart thing on the back side of the drill here, so that we're ready to go to the field after bed. Alright, so we are filling with some rye seed. We got the fancy seed wagon here with the hydraulic auger, and rye going into the hopper. I don't think I have enough left to fill this, but we're going to run the rest of it into the seed tender thing here, or the seed cart I'll call it, I guess, so that we can finish up seeding the cover crops, both for the cost share and then some additional stuff to kind of combat erosion in some spots that cause problems. So it's just afternoon right now. Had lunch a little bit early to get to the field and get some cover crop on here. It's actually turned out to be a really nice day. It's actually warmer than expected, and the sun is shining if you saw me squint there. Probably it won't show up in the camera, but it's actually pretty nice. It's like 54 degrees, which is warmer than they predicted. That's a first for quite a while. And we're going to try to seed some cover crops. I still need to fix the tube that I noticed was loose earlier. But other than that, I think we should be about ready to go. Gonna do some on these contour rows here. There's terraces, but below the terraces, some spots that kind of like to wash, and some of the terraces themselves are steeper than ideal. So I think that they'll benefit from having the cover crop on as far as preventing erosion and kind of tying the soil together and providing some residue for the rains to hit next spring. So we'll get that tube fixed and get to rolling. So right now we're planting some rye auto steering. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see on the screen or not. On a curve. So I haven't really used the auto steer on this tractor a ton, and what I have used has mostly been fairly straight. So I'm kind of curious to see how it does. When I was doing some curves yesterday, I believe, it seemed like it was really hunting a lot, like the front wheels were weaving back and forth. So we're gonna see how this goes. So far it's not too bad. I'm a little bit curious how it's gonna act once we get further down the hill here, because we've got at least one more terrace and a half, we'll call it. So probably 6-7 passes before we get down underneath the terraces to the straight rows. So we're gonna see how this goes. It could be interesting, but we're experimenting putting on cover crop because it doesn't really matter whether the rows are straight or if there's some gaps or whatever. We'll live with that. Well, it looks like we have a plugged seat tube, so we're gonna unplug. And since my blockage sensors aren't working, I have to just sort of look back here. You can see instead of going down the tube, it's flowing back up. So going across the field, you'll see rye popping up there. So we're gonna pull these little loose, pull the tube loose, and most likely it's full of rye seed, or maybe there's a chunk of crap. Nope, clear there. So probably something's plugged downstream, so we're gonna have to knock the rye out of there and get air flowing through, and then go back to work. We're unplugged and I'll push back up, and we're gonna try it and see how things go. The auto steer on the contours is not working great, partly because we have the intakes, the orange standpipes there where the water goes into the ground that we have to steer around. So I have to manually steer around them, and then that throws off the line that the auto steer would use. If we had like an actual curve set up that was right where it would work with everything, or we had those on saved in as obstacles, it might work better. But definitely not ready to hook up the soybean planter or the corn planter and auto steer without markers at this point. So I'll give a little bit better update as we get further down the hill here. I'm going to try to get kind of a smooth pass on this one and then auto steer a few and see how it acts. But this tractor has what's called a super steer front axle, so instead of just turning the wheel, it actually like shifts the axle underneath the front end. And I think that's probably part of the issue. It might also just need to be calibrated a little bit better as far as like the settings and stuff. But I know that these super steer tractors can be a little finicky as far as getting auto steer to work reliably. So I think that that might be part of the issue. So this is kind of what we're seeing on the auto steer. The pass that so we're driving past manually. We're using a smartpath or whatever on the ag meter system here. So you just drive one pass manually. Auto steering the first pass seems to not work too bad, but the problem is if it's off, it waggles, and then the waggle is in the path that it guides off the next one. So I don't know if you can tell or not, but we're just sort of like going along here, wavering back and forth because it wavered off of the smooth pass on the last smooth path on the last pass. So again, I'm not sure if that's calibration or a combination of calibration and the super steer tractor that is kind of a little bit wonky or different than most other auto steer applications, or pure super steer wonkiness. But it doesn't seem like pure auto steer for planting is a good idea with this configuration, with the calibration that we have on everything right now, which is kind of disappointing. But there's always room for improvement, so maybe we'll get it figured out. Maybe we'll keep using markers. I would really like to get away from using markers when we plant soybeans, just because some of the ground is kind of steeper, especially on indrows and stuff like that. And would like to avoid having the marker track, which can become the start of a gully. But so far we're doing pretty good on the rye situation, although I need to turn around here, so I'm going to push the button to downshift, which is pretty handy actually. And then when we cross the end rows, I have to hit the button to turn off the electric clutch and then pick up, yank the steering wheel to defeat the auto steer. We're doing this a little bit slower than I normally would because I'm holding the camera with the other hand. But we'll come back in. So when I'm not auto steering, I'm mostly just driving off of the combine passes. Hit the button to engage. Probably I'm going to have to do some manual steering here anyway, because we've got intakes on this pass. But here we've got some nice waggling of the front tires. So as I was saying, when we're not auto steering, I'm just driving up the planter pass. So we have a 12-row planter, which is the same width as the air drill that I'm using right now, and 6-row head. So with the stock stoppers on the head to kind of knock down the stalks a little bit, usually you can kind of tell that some of the stalks are bent away from you and some of them are bent towards you just based on the color. A lot easier to see in the sunlight than in the dark when you're using lights. We can kind of tell by that we want to drive the middle or between those two combine passes, and we're also driving on the combine tire tracks, so we can kind of tell based on where things are mashed down where we want to be with the tractor here. My markers may have been off a little bit when I planted, so when I was doing auto steer on the straight stuff, we were not coming out perfect. I don't know if that's if the grade compensation is not quite working right, or as far as like the tilt on the antenna not adjusting up and down the hills right, or if that's just from the auto steer, or sorry, the markers being off when I planted. But for the most part, I can just drive the combine passes and should have the same coverage as I had with the corn planter anyway. So that's the way that we're doing it when we're not auto steering. Alright, so we got finished up with that patch on the contours, and I ended up just driving with the steering wheel. Auto steer seemed like it was more trouble than it was worth. And plus there's kind of some, not exactly ditches, but some spots where it's washed a little bit that I wanted to be able to kind of slow down for, that were pretty close together. I probably should have disked them in before we put the cover crop on, but I disked them in a couple of years ago and they're still there, so we're going to try just the cover crop this year, I guess, and see how that goes. I'm in the process of heading back to another patch where we're going to do a little bit more, and then probably we'll be done with this field. Might do a little bit more up above the terraces here, but I think I'm about to my obligated acres for the cost share, and don't have a ton of seed left, so I think I'm probably going to hit some spots on the bean stubble where I want to make sure we don't have erosion problems. But when we're going across the field here, I thought that would be a good opportunity to address one other item that I don't think I've mentioned yet, that probably is the main reason that I will never, or won't in the near term, use this to seed beans, and that's that the wings don't go down on the sides. Like, they'll flex up, which is fine if you're going through like a valley type low spot, but when you're going over the top of a knob or a terrace or something like that, you end up with your outer row units sticking up and run out of travel on the linkage, where you're not able to maintain depth, and you end up putting seed on top of the ground, which for rye doesn't really matter, but for soybeans is a little bit more of a problem, because you can have stuff, sitting in dry dirt, or washing down the hill if it does rain after planting, and that's probably not going to work very well in our terrain. If you're somewhere that's very flat, probably it wouldn't matter. And I think, so this is like a Hiniker 4800 with a 5800 air cart. After they quit making these, or the next model was like a 4836, which is a pull type device, and I think that the wings would flex down, and that maybe was one of the reasons that they made that type of implement. Being mounted, I think, doesn't work quite as well for the contour rows either, because then you're, when you turn the steering wheel, you're putting a lot of sideways pressure on those row units. So it's not the perfect device, but it's not working too bad for what we're using it for, and it's a lot less expensive than a lot of 30-foot seating devices, particularly ones that are the color of the grass over there, maybe. But I'm over here to the other spot, so I'll stop jabbering and get to work. All right, it's about 3:45, and we are finished with cover crops. So I got the stuff that I was doing on the corn stalks done, and then did about 5 or 10 acres in a couple other fields in some steep areas. And back home, got the tractor parked. Took a ratchet strap and maybe solved the problem with the wings flipping down, at least temporarily, and ready to shut the doors and call it a week. Seemed like things went fairly smoothly today overall. I didn't get the drill as clean at the end as I wanted it to be, so I think it's supposed to be dry next week, so when I get back Tuesday, may take it out in some corn stalks and just run it through to kind of try to knock as much of that stuff off as possible before we park it. I might use it. I'm going to need to seed some waterway stuff once the dozer gets here to rework them. And I might use this, but probably more likely I'll use the smaller no-till drill, because I think it'll work better. It's a narrower spacing, so kind of will get the grass closer together, or have less space between the grass seeds at least. So probably just I'm going to clean this up, and then the little bit of rye that's left in the seed hopper, I'll just mix that in with the stuff for the waterways. There's not too much left, probably less than a bushel, I would say. I think it looked like it had started to run out maybe on those 2 inside meters on the left hopper, but other than, I think we plugged one right at the beginning. Other than that, things went pretty smoothly today, so can't complain. Got the cover crop on at a reasonably decent time. Obviously would have been better to do it earlier, but with the weather we've got coming next week, I think that a lot of that hopefully will sprout and at least get started before it goes dormant over the winter. And then obviously we'll get a lot of growth next spring as well when it starts warming up. So anywho, that's where we're at. Onward and upward.